Welcome to the Empowered Living Zone, where you can create the life you crave. With me, Dr. A, as a psychologist for over 30 years, a transformational life coach, and an expert in self-empowerment, my life's work has been inspired by the beautifully powerful resilience of the human spirit. We will share stories and successes of people who have not only overcome personal adversity, but have used their traumas and hardships courageously as a springboard into greatness. Create positive transformational shifts on your way to achieving phenomenal success. Get ready to level up as you move beyond the challenging terrain of your life's journey into the empowered living zone. Ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision, the Empowered Living Zone show starts now. Welcome to the Empowered Living Zone, where we explore self-empowerment, personal growth, and the journey to becoming our best selves. I am your host, Dr. A, and today is the final episode of the Empowered Living Zone. And of course, I am here today with a mix of emotions. There are goodbyes, and so of course there's some sadness with goodbyes, but there's also gratitude in terms of all of the support that I have received from Transformation Talk Radio and its network in actually creating this current podcast, as well as excitement about what is to come. And so before we start today's discussion about my own growth and evolution and the new ideas that are coming, I'd like to take some time to thank those that have made this possible for me. I would like to thank Dr. Pat Baselli, who is the founder of Transformation Talk Network, who, with all of her experience and wisdom, has so graciously mentored and prepared me for this podcast. To Jessica and Chris Henderson, who've been responsible for all of the preparations, including visual assets, intros and outros, and to my producers, Sierra, Emily, Moxie, Nate, and Stephen. So again, I really appreciate that. What I would like to do is then shift to our guests today. I'd like to start with Esteban Arellano. He is a graphic designer, artist, and dreamer of utopias beyond our current moment. Esteban is a Harvard graduate who specializes in brand identity and design systems that foster culture and community. He is an accomplished writer, photographer, filmmaker, currently working on a queer sci-fi short film. Born in and raised in Colorado, Esteban now resides in Echo Park, Los Angeles. Welcome, Esteban.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction.
You're very welcome. And then we're going to go on to Eric Cheng. He is an LA-based actor, writer, and host of his own podcast called No So True with Eric Cheng. Eric focuses on navigating the struggles of being in his 20s. He also is a Harvard graduate and a proud Gaysian. He combines humor and vulnerability to connect with diverse audiences. Eric has acted in numerous productions and is passionate about creating stories that reflect authentic perspectives. Welcome, Eric.
Hi, Dr. Charleanea. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
You're very welcome. I am very excited. And then last, but of course not least, is Connie Smith. She is the founder of High Five PR, media expert, and senior producer of Detroit's The Nine. Connie brings her expertise in storytelling and authenticity to the team. And what I'd like to do, thank you for coming, Connie. I'm great to have you here. And I would like to let the listeners know why you are here today. We are going to be doing a roundtable discussion, and there is definitely a significance to having you all. You are basically the faces of my future. And we are going to be talking today, not only about my experience as a first-time podcast host, but kind of my evolution and growth, and then how you all came on board. And we have been working together very passionately about ideas for our future and for my future as a podcast host. So welcome, everybody. I'm excited to have all of you participating in this in this monumental step for me, this developmental milestone. So thank you very much.
You are welcome. So
Yeah,
fun.
for having us. Excited to be here.
Well, and I know the listeners don't know this, but the three of you have been on this journey with me for basically 6 months. And it's hard to believe. I'm actually sitting here thinking, oh my goodness, 2024 is over. And I remember when I went on my very first podcast, and I remember when Transformation Talk Network had actually reached out to me, I believe in September of 2022. And at that point, I had clients kind of planting a bug in my ear about podcasting. They're like, Dr. A, you got to be on podcasts. You know, your words of wisdom are always ringing in my ears. And I think you need to share this with everybody. And of course, you know, the universe and its synchronicity brought Transformation Talk Network to me and said, hey, would you be interested in this? And I said, well, it's interesting that you said this because I just had people approach me. And so I got on board with that. And I'm going to be really honest. I didn't know a single thing about podcasting. And quite frankly, I was absolutely terrified of being in the public spotlight. I can remember I probably spent about 40 hours. I'm not kidding you guys, about 40 hours preparing for my first podcast. And I was terrified coming on air. And of course, I owned that. And what's interesting is to see the evolution. And, you know, I loved all of the support, particularly with Dr. Pat. She really helped evolve me and grow me. And about mid-year, I realized, oh, I got this down. I got it. I'm feeling more comfortable and I'm ready for something new. And in that, I initially reached out to Connie and said, hey, listen, I'm ready. I'm ready to come out fully and, you know, embrace bigger things. And so Connie came on board, and shortly after I invited Esteban and Eric into the mix, and we have been working passionately on the next project. And so I want to stop there because I know I'm doing a lot of talking, and I would love, I mean, I've shared my perspective and my experience of my growth during this time. I would love each of you to chime in terms of your experience of this process.
Okay, I'll go first. I've first of all, I've really enjoyed working with you and the whole team for the past 6 months or so. And what I found with you as a client, so, you know, I'm a publicist and my job is to really help my clients find their nugget of value for the greater population and help them to communicate that in a very clear and concise way. And Dr. A is just amazing when it comes to really communicating like the person's what makes up a person and their personality. And it's, as a former TV producer, when you dive into the world of mental health, it's rare to find somebody who can really deliver strong messages and uplift people at the same time. So I knew that like Dr. A was a winner and we needed to see her do more. And I could not wait to see like or hear how Dr. A would interact with other guests, because that's always extremely fascinating when you get two people in a conversation, especially if something that's a hot topic or a taboo subject, and to hear a professional speak personally and professionally on it. I just find mental health fascinating.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you.
I can jump in next. I think this has been a really exciting process to see you go through over the course of this year, and just kind of witness this growth in your own career. If the listeners can't tell from our shared last name, we are related. I am Dr. A's son, but more than that, I've also just become a supporter of this project, both as her son, but also as someone that works in this space of creating content, creating stories, and creating brand identities around really inspirational figures. So it's been really great to work with her in this like a new capacity this year. But I think more than anything, just seeing this growth personally as her son has been a really exciting transformation. I've seen her be in this role of, a thought leader and expert in mental health and supporter of relationships and people that, have come from the most adverse conditions to step into greatness. I think that's something I've seen my whole life. It's been such a gift, though, I think, to see her starting out this podcast and try something new for the first time. It's never too late to start something completely new. And I've seen her get out of her comfort zone, like do things that she's never done before. I was there with her while she was writing this first episode almost a year ago, where she was working tirelessly over it, making sure it's perfect and just right. And just only for that first episode, I think most of the script kind of like went out the door, like the outline went out the door, and it just kind of improvised as the show went on. And so I think it's been great to see her like step into her own power. This podcast, this series has been about Dr. A helping uncover those stories in her guests, but I think in a way it's also been about her uncovering her own power and finding her own strength as a person.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I totally agree. And just kind of jumping off of that, I mean, what really brought me onto the team and what really compelled me is Dr. A's ability to combine those parts of her, 30-year psychologist, life coach, with her very personal story and her very personal approach, and being able to help people through that. I think that we're going to talk more about what the actual project looks like, what the next podcast looks like. But what attracts me the most is, who it's for. There are a lot of people in across different age brackets, including my own. I identify as a young person, Gen Z, who are experiencing a lot of difficulty, a lot of pain, suffering even, and need a kind of mentor figure, someone who has both expertise and lived experience and just, a warmth demeanor, to be able to help us through that. And I think that this media is so helpful for us to be able to do that, or this medium rather. And so I'm really excited for you to, get to share this with everyone, Dr. A, and to really, spearhead it. I think it's going to be really exciting.
Yeah, I am excited. Thank you. Thank you all. And, each of you brought up some really important points that I'd like to highlight. And I think it would be a great transition to what's new. When I started this podcast, Empowerment Living Zone, my big thing was self-empowerment. And I started from the get-go, this idea that I shared my own vulnerability in terms of my own story of adversity. And it was really important for me to instill inspiration and hope in my listeners around the concept that one, your life does not define you. These are just experiences that you have. And some of us, were dealt a rough hand. I'm one of those that was dealt a really rough hand. And I'm also a testament to the fact that it doesn't matter what hand you're dealt, that you can still thrive and you can still do wonderful things in your life. And as a matter of fact, not only that, but a lot of times, and especially in my case, my own adversity was my springboard into greatness. And I wanted to share that story with others. And that's where I started. And I think it's interesting because I'm also thinking about my own growth. I remember, having to have my script, and, it was a safety net for me. I wanted to know exactly what I was going to say and when I was going to say it, and feel like I had that safety. And the evolution has been, trusting the process, trusting myself to just show up in my own wisdom. So that's important. I think the other thing that was really important is twofold, and it really kind of it provides the juncture, or it provides the bridge to what's new. I noticed a couple of things. One is, and I've said this over and over again, I am almost 60 years old. I will be 60 years old in 4 months, less than 4 months. And it's never too late. In 2024, in my 59th year of my life, was the first time that I came out. And when I say I came out, I mean every way, shape, and form. Up until this time, I had been in private practice for over 30 years in my own little cave, nose to the grindstone, not out in the world. And I decided it was time. It was time to come out. It was time to share my gifts. It was time to leave legacy and have a greater impact. And so that was important. And it was important for my listeners to hear it is never too late. I have come out at 60. And in addition, coming out as a brown queer person was also important. And quite frankly, that did not come out until the end of this journey. So, again, it's never too late. That's one thing. The second thing in this journey that really got my attention is exactly what Eric talked about. And that is, it doesn't matter what age you are. You can struggle. And whether you're 20 something or you're 50 something, or quite frankly, even 80 something, as some of my clients are, this challenge in life never goes away. And what is important to me, and I think that this is really a preview to where we are going, what is important to me is to normalize the struggle, is to normalize the real shit that we go through. And my goal, and this is what the team has been working so passionately about creating a new idea, is to provide a platform, to provide a medium where we talk about real things that are hard. And my providing one, words of wisdom, but also giving permission and providing and normalizing the struggle for anybody, particularly for the 20 somethings, because as you will learn, should you follow us into the next chapter, one of our episodes really talks about how the younger generation has really lost some really important things that older generations have had. And one of those things is elders, mentors, people that kind of show you the way. And what has happened is technology, erroneously, people think it's a form of connection and mentorship. And really all it is data and it's information. And so 20 somethings are really struggling with lack of connection, lack of direction, lack of mentorship. And so that has also been a really important thread that I believe has kind of thrust us into the next iteration of what we're doing. All right, so I'm going to stop talking. I would love to hear input from all of you about this.
Well, I'd love to add to that. I think exactly based on what you're saying, I think that that gave us a really great opportunity to create something new that was, in some ways an offshoot of this. But you have such an ability to not only understand people from different communities, including younger communities, but also to be able to serve them. I think that whether we're talking about BIPOC or queer people, I think that that's something that we're really bringing in with the energy for this podcast, is that you're talking about the real things that apply in this very present day that we're in, outside of perhaps who's notoriously had access to mental health resources before. I'm thinking about how excited I am to talk about non-traditional relationships, whether that's, queer relationships, poly relationships, etc., and how you have the ability and the opportunity to really sit with them, and they can actually trust you as a mentor figure, as a coach figure. And so I think that's just something that's really different and unique from what exists right now amongst all of the psychology, pop psychology, self-help content, is really getting down to those authentic and very real stories for those who haven't really had a chance to talk or be listened to yet.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think what's also really exciting to me is something that you focus on a lot in your practice, especially in your transition over your career from, licensed psychologist into more of a transformational life coach role. You're bringing that clinical expertise that you've developed over your entire career and you've got from your research and your practice. But I think you've recognized a real shortcoming with psychology, which is something that I think I've even encountered as a client, as someone that has, been to therapy, is just that it feels like therapy can only get you so far in terms of getting you the life that you want to have. I think therapy is really great at addressing what has happened to you and thinking about how that's made you who you are today. But I think that missing piece is how to go forward from there and how to progress from there. I think a lot of psychology models and therapy models in general don't have that piece there. Whereas I feel like you've spent your career really focusing on that next step, focusing on like what the future holds and how to step into power, and thinking of power as something that's not, this faked expression or something that's just like, oh, you just gotta put a smile on and work hard and you're gonna be powerful. It's actually leaning into those things that make you feel disempowered, or the things that have made you feel really challenged in your life, and thinking about how to use those for your benefit. I think that's a really novel and just great concept, just because I think it shows that anyone can learn from this work and anyone can use their life experience going forward. And as Eric was saying, regardless of their backgrounds, you could be coming from, you could be a queer person, you could be coming from, a working class background, or maybe you've never really had access to mental health tools. And I think that this podcast will be an opportunity to share some of these gifts you've been able to only share within more private practice sessions.
Thank you. Thank you, Esteban.
Yeah, I think that this is a real unique opportunity to touch so many different generations. And as a person who's been in therapy, sometimes you feel like we get an hour and we're just kind of mulling over like just some real basic stuff. And by the time you've been in for 6 months, once a week, and $40 a week, all of this dollars down the drain, not to poo-poo on therapy. Sometimes I feel like you just don't get anywhere. And what I love about what Dr. A offers is that, yeah, we're going to acknowledge those touch points of trauma and pain, but we're going to like acknowledge them, assess them, and we're going to move on because that's not who you are anymore, right? Like that's what shaped your lens, but we're going to move on from that. And I love too that it's interesting. So Dr. A in her practice has many specialties, but one of them is men who have temper tantrums. Like there's so many things to talk about with this podcast that she hasn't even really touched on this platform. And this platform is great, but there's so much more I want to get into. And I do want to say that I'm so proud of you for just owning your entire self this year, because being authentic with who you are and fully loving yourself helps you to connect with everybody. And that's so important. And the next phase of your show is to have that real connection. And it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Connie. Thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much. I appreciate all of your input. And I think what really strikes me with what everybody has said is, I'm looking at my own, and you all have witnessed this, looking at my own growth and evolution. And, I am really excited about the next chapter, and I'm really excited about the voices that will be represented on the podcast, as well as the topics that we will be covering, so that this can be a podcast that can help anybody, who, as Esteban was saying, can't access mental health. And there is something that I want to say, and I don't want to. I'm waiting for the drum roll, and I don't want to do a spoiler alert, but I am going to say this: something that was really important to me in my own growth and my own revolution is that my own evolution, maybe revolution too, is this idea of who I am as somebody who serves others. And I started in a very traditional role as a clinical psychologist. I was trained in a very traditional model of, a medical model where people are broken, damaged, diseased. And what happened is I got out into the world and started working with people and serving people. It was quite frankly, in my opinion, a bunch of BS. And what I found was that, people are naturally whole and resourceful. They are. And they're coming to me for support. And it really changed my perspective, and it actually motivated me to go into the coaching world, because the coaching world's premise is that we are all naturally resourceve, creative, and whole, and that's important to me. So that's one thing. The second thing is I often refer to myself as the untherapist. I break rules, and some of the rules are I am who I am, and I'm going to be transparent, and I'm going to share anything about myself that I believe is going to be helpful. And that is a no-no in the traditional world of clinical psychology. So, these are things that I'm bringing with me to the next iteration. And so I think it's important for the listeners to know that this is going to be real stuff. And I am going to show up as a real person, but not only with my own personal experiences, but I'm also bringing to the table over 30 years of experience and wisdom that I want to impart to our listeners. And so I want to shift real quickly, because I'm being aware of the time, and I know that we need to take a break in about 3 minutes. And I do want to do the drum roll, and I'm not going to announce this because, quite frankly, I would love, and Esteban and Eric, whoever wants to take this on, I would actually love for you to take this on, because this was your thing in terms of the new podcast and what we called it. And I would love for you to explain to the listeners why we chose this name. Who'd like to go?
Eric, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I can start us off. Because as someone we would love to take credit for this, but of course it was inspired by you. But we were really thinking about, okay, in this direction that we want to go and appealing to a larger audience, and especially including a younger audience, how can we encapsulate all of the different roles that you play? We talked about psychologist, life coach, elder, mentor, something like that. And so we kind of had the idea of, oh, what about she's mother, it's that lingo that's really in the zeitgeist, referring to just a badass female character or hero, someone who takes care of people, someone who will also kind of hold you accountable and check you on your S word. And so we thought that in a lot of ways, it really kind of fit who you are. Okay, Esteban, I'll hand it over to you.
No, that's great. Yeah. So as Eric alluded to, this new phase, this new show that we're going to be going into is called She is Mother, which we are really excited for to take into this new phase. Everything that Eric said just really, I thought, encapsulated everything that Dr. Arellano is doing with her practice, and just, more multiple roles as both a mentor to her clients, someone that has led the way, especially within a queer sense as well. Also as a literal mother, being my own mother as well. There's many ways in which it really fits her title. And so we feel like it makes sense for her new era of empowerment.
It has multitudes. Mother is mothering.
Thank you, you two, for sharing the concept. And I know we need to take a quick break, so we'll be right back. You're listening to the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and my guest Esteban Arellano, Connie Smith, and Eric Cheng. We'll be right back. Thank you. Welcome back to the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and my guests Esteban Arellano and Connie Smith, who are the producers of my new podcast that will be launching in January of 2025. She is Mother. And what we would like to do is talk about what it is about this podcast that makes it unique or different. And I'm going to hand it over to Connie, because I think Connie is interesting as I think about our process and our own evolution of an idea. I really do believe on some level you kind of planted the seeds a little bit. I think about some of our conversations that actually led me to reach out to Esteban and Eric about this idea. So I would love to hand the floor over to you and you talk about this.
Sure. So when we started working together, I knew you had a podcast, I knew you had a practice, and we were working on building your audience. And there was just something missing, and I just couldn't quite put my finger on it right away. And then a mutual friend of ours was like, yeah, Charlena's partner. I was like, okay. And I've heard you say partner before. And it wasn't until a couple of weeks later, you said something about being, or that your partner's name, and it was a female name. And I was like, Lorena, Charleana, is Charleana gay? And then I asked you about it directly because, and here's why, not that your sexuality and your personal life is your personal life, right? And whether you want to share it or not, that's a big choice. And that's something that you really need to think about. However, when you are making the choice to be a public figure, a person in the media, and you want to connect with others, it's extremely important that you are giving as much of yourself away as possible with appropriate boundaries, because people want to see themselves in others. And being authentic and true to who you are, it makes you vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, that builds trust. And then a relationship is formed. And that is important in all aspects of communication, whether you're on the television as a TV reporter or anchor. And I know that's going to sound weird, and I can circle back to that. But specifically in social media and in podcasting, you want to feel like when you're driving the car that you're listening to your best friend, or you're listening to somebody who has walked, the same mile in your shoes. Like they've been there before. At the end of the day, we kind of want our feelings validated and we want to be mirrored. And so when I learned that big fact about who you are, that opened up to me this thought of like all of these experiences that you've lived. Like I know you say you're going to be 60 in April. It made me think, as somebody who's 44, about being a teenager in the 90s and thinking about my neighbors who were lesbians and the gossip and the strife that they had to deal with growing up at that time. It made me think about all of these experiences that you have lived that you have yet to really talk about, and how sharing your story and trauma or triumphs will really help, especially Eric and Esteban's generation, who are in their early 20s. And we live in a much more loving world, but it's still, we still have some issues. And so I'm like, gosh, Charleanea, you really need to, think about this in opening up, because it is beautiful and it comes full circle. And I really think that you're going to help so many more people by being authentic with who you are. And I know that can be so uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And Connie, I really appreciated your challenge on some level. I mean, I remember the conversation because Esteban and Eric and I were talking, and obviously they knew the context. You did not know
Oh,
that I was
that's right.
queer,
Yeah.
right? And we were talking about it, and I came back with, oh, we've got a really catchy title. We're going to call it "She Is Mother," and it's kind of in the queer community. There's a reference to, I don't know, Esteban, you can step in here, the house mothers with drag queens, and so that was kind of the original reference. And Connie's looking dumbfounded, like, is this appropriation? Is this not okay?
Right.
And I
I
said,
had no idea.
yeah, you're like, I think we might be stepping on some toes. And then I said, well, Connie, I think there's something you should know. I am queer. And you're like, there was the shock. And, it was interesting as this idea was developing. And I understand, and I think this is important for listeners to hear. You are never too old to keep growing and evolving and getting to levels of acceptance and self-acceptance and self-compassion and levels of courage. And I'll be really transparent with the readers. There was a reason the listeners, there was a reason why I was in my own cave. Quite frankly, I was hiding. And why was I hiding? Well, when I got my PhD, I will tell you, over and over and over again, I was the only brown person, much less queer, because a lot of my colleagues did not know I was queer. I was in the closet because it was at a time of Matthew Shepard. It was not safe to be out, and I was the only brown person. Things were said that were inappropriate, microaggressions, absolute ignorance, implicit bias. And I got tired of being representation of every Latino in the entire world. So I got tired of it and I ducked out. I got tired of the judgment. I got tired of not feeling like I belonged. And so when I came out in 2024, it was a huge, courageous act. And part of it was fueled actually by my age. Developmentally, I wanted to have an impact. I wanted to do something bigger, not for my own ego, but I felt a calling, like a purpose, a soul calling, that I was meant to do something more than I was doing. And so I answered that calling. And so as I was doing this and I was getting my feet wet in podcasting, about midway, it was like, okay, this isn't enough. I want to do more. I want to do more. And as I reached out to all of you and we started, incubating these ideas, I recognized something. And it was a tough personal confrontation. And that tough confrontation with myself was, Charleanea, if you have to walk the talk. If you're going to invite everybody to be authentic, if you're going to invite people to be real, if you're going to invite people to really trust that who they are, exactly the way they are, is a gift to the world, then you have to lead the way and do the talk as well as the walk. And so in that moment, and again, I'm not going to lie, it was scary because when I stepped into the podcasting world, I will be honest, I was terrified of judgment. I was terrified. We are in a world and a culture, a cancel culture, a hater culture, and I was terrified of speaking my truth. And so this upped the ante, because it was like, okay, I am coming out completely vulnerable, naked, everything about me. I'm not holding back. And quite frankly, I was terrified on one level. And also at the same time, I felt free and empowered, because there was nothing to hide. There's nothing to protect. It is all out. And if somebody has a problem with it, then they have a problem with it. I am still going to show up in all of my truth and trust that whatever I have to share is going to reach the person that it needs to reach. End of story. So that's kind of the story about that. And this is the passion that fueled She Is Mother.
It's so beautiful. And for those who are listening to, like, if you haven't listened to Charlena's previous episodes, Charlene is a kid who comes from trauma and poverty. And when you come from trauma and poverty, you're just trying to survive and make it, let alone thrive. And when I mean by thrive, I mean going to college, getting a master's degree, getting a doctorate. That's huge, especially when you're not born into a support system that can take care of you and nurture you emotionally and financially, which you did not. And I recognize that because, that's part of my own upbringing, which I'm not nearly as accomplished as you are. But I understand that feeling of we're just going to head down and just keep, achieving what we could do and get the heck out of here.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, and it also, what it brings up for me, Connie, is a couple of things. One is, being in my family. And I think there's a piece of this that I think is part of the Latino culture, not just my family, but the Latino culture. I mean, I remember being in oh my goodness, I was probably in my 30s, and I went to a comedy club to listen to George Lopez. And it was hilarious because I went with all my cousins, obviously all Latino, right? And I went with a white friend. And we are busting a gut, laughing. We're rolling out of our chairs practically. And the white friend is going, I don't get it. And what he talked about was the idea of humility in the Latino culture, which basically translates to: you cannot be too big for your bridges. You cannot shine. You cannot bring attention to yourself. You cannot stand out. You cannot own in all the glory of who you are. And so growing up in that environment, I played small. I hid. For the longest time, I didn't even refer to myself as Dr. Arellano. I forgot that I was a doctor, because I had been taught that it was shameful to shine. And what I realize now, of course, there's a beautiful Marianne Williamson quote that I will not get into, but the idea that who am I not to shine? When I shine, I give other people permission to shine. When I show my brilliance, it lights the path for everybody else to show their brilliance. And when people show their brilliance, it's a gift to the world. And that's what I want to do, is I want to share my gift to the world, not because it needs to stroke my own ego, because it's my obligation. It is what I am here for. This is my contribution to the world, and I cannot live with myself if I don't answer the call. And that is really what's fueled this next iteration. And I'm going to stop talking. I know I'm getting excited and passionate. I don't know if either you, Esteban, or Connie, would like to add to what I've shared.
That's powerful. Like, that's big, just stepping into your purpose and living it and deciding this is just what I'm gonna do. Like, that needs to be heard and said and yelled and listened to.
Definitely. I feel like it's interesting, I think, to hear all this, just because, like I alluded to earlier, I feel like I've witnessed this transformation within you over the course of, my life too. Just the way you started your career when I was a child versus where it is now is just so tremendously different. And I think it's interesting throughout all this that you feel like you're just now beginning to step into this place of power and owning your story, because I think this is something that you've done for your clients for your entire career. So I guess I'm curious, like how it feels maybe to be almost like on the receiving end of the support you've been giving people all this time. It seems like you're kind of giving yourself that support now, finally.
Right. It's a great question, Esteban. And I'll answer it. It's going to sound a little bit like a tangent, but I promise I'll get to it. What I've come to learn in all of these years that I have been growing and healing and struggling and, even providing the services that I provide to my clients is, it's almost like I think about growth and healing as almost like a spiral staircase. And a lot of times we revisit the same spot, but what we and sometimes I'll be honest, I get frustrated with myself. It's like, oh my God, is it this again? I thought I've got this figured out. What I realize is that you're at a different level. So you revisit these things over and over and over again. And I think about my own journey, not only from the perspective of helping others, like I I feel fortunate. I feel really lucky that, despite what I went through as a child, and I went through a lot of hardship and a lot of adversity, I still feel very fortunate, very blessed, very privileged that every single day I wake up and I love what I do and I love helping others. And I did that for a long time. And at exactly the same time, I finally got, it took me a while to get here. I finally got that, there's a proverb, and I'm not going to be able to state it as eloquently as the proverb, but basically the message is that the teacher and the student are the same. And I believe that everything that I've taught, everything that I've healed in others, at the same time I was healing in myself. And it took me a long time. There's levels, there's these iterations, there's these developmental milestones that I've reached, where each time I've owned just a little bit more of who I am. Each time I've given myself the things that I give my clients, acceptance, radical, unconditional acceptance, compassion, empathy, encouragement. And it was like, oh my goodness, I had, because of my own childhood wounds and programming and conditioning, I didn't allow that for myself. And finally, I stepped into that. And as I stepped into that and I allowed it from myself and giving it to myself. And I allowed it, it was like I realized, this year, as a matter of fact, that I was actually blocking my own flow of love, my own flow of encouragement, my own flow of support. And when I recognized that, and it's been hard, it's a process, it's not a done deal, it's not a destination. When I recognized that and I opened to it, what came from it is beautiful, and I know that not only do I benefit in my own healing and growth, but ultimately everybody that I come in contact with, everybody that I support, even the person that I see at the grocery store and I share something as simple as a smile or my energy, my loving, accepting energy, that I recognize it's not only for me, but it's also for everybody. And, getting over that hump and recognizing, we're all connected, we're all supported. And it's important for me to take and to do, and to take support and to take love and to do these things for myself, to nourish myself so that I can show up as my best version of who I am in helping and supporting others.
I love that. I think that's great. And I feel like in a way too, that's that discovery for yourself, that process of getting into this place of flow is what you're trying to help your listeners and your clients find themselves. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to what it feels like to be empowered, or what it feels like to kind of, be in this place. I know you've had a little bit of a transition over your career with like the title of your work. Like it used to be called the Empowered Living Zone. That's kind of what it's called right now with this network as well, which I think is a really great title of speaking to this zone, this place where it feels like to be empowered. I think we're transitioning from that title, but still, I think that essence is still within your work of trying to be in a zone of empowerment and using the adversity to lead, to be a springboard into greatness. I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more to that feeling of being empowered that you found for yourself and that you want to help your clients find too, and your listeners for in the future?
Right, right. I think it's a great question, and it is definitely a window into the process, Esteban. Like I said, I have been doing this a long time, and empowered living has been my brand for over 20 years. And for a long time, I think it accurately represented what was important to me, and that was the idea of living life from an empowered way. And then what happened was, this year in particular, and I'm not going to even say the entire year, I think it hit about between June and September of this year. So this is really fresh. I started realizing, there's something different about me. I'm coming into something. I'm owning something that maybe I hadn't either been ready to own or that I wasn't able to see. And, this is I have shared with lots of people that know me well that this has been, it's crazy to say this, almost 60, and this has been the best year of my life. And I've expanded, I've grown, I've been into this creative energy, and it has been magical. And at the same time, what I recognized is I evolved as well. And I realized that empowered living was missing something. Like, yeah, empowerment is important to me. And, I want people to understand this idea, this concept of power. Power has got a bad name, and people misuse power, but power is not bad. Power is something that's in us. It's not a power over, it's not a power through, it's not an under power. It is a power within us that we can all tap into that is completely indestructible and untouched by adversity. And that was something that was really important to me. What I recognized in my own evolution, Esteban, was that there was something about the brand that wasn't quite capturing who I was. And I really sat with this. And quite frankly, I needed you, I needed Eric, and I needed Connie, and I needed Lorena, quite frankly, a good friend of mine, to be a mirror. And I think I've always been closed off to the mirror. Like I didn't want to know what other people saw. And I finally was courageous enough to ask. And I was surprised, yet it was like, no, that is true about me. And one of the things that really came out was this idea that I was a badass. And yeah, I mean, it has taken an incredible amount of persistence, tenacity, strength, fortitude, outright bravery to do what I had done. And it's not just in my professional life, but it's in my personal life. Like the things that I have faced, it was, damn it, it's time for me to own this part of me. Like, yeah, I think that the more gentle, soft, flowy, motherly, warm, I don't know if I'd ever call myself fuzzy, but that warmth, it was something that was easy for me to accept. Yet I think what was really hard, because of my own struggles around power and aggression, to me being and rough and aggressive, and it had a bad taste for me. And I realized that was a story that I was making up. And it was important for me to own all of who I was, queer, Latina, badass, unshrinking, loving, kind, authentic. And I think that's the whole package, and walking that talk, that's the whole package. And I think it inspired this next iteration with, She Is Mother. Not only do I want to show and demonstrate to the world all of these facets of me, the vulnerability, the transparency, the kindness and the compassion and the warmth, but I want to demonstrate to everybody, you can do hard things. We have the power in us to face hard things. One, first and foremost. Secondly, challenge, struggle is not a sign of failure, and it's not a bad thing. And we are going to normalize that with She Is Mother. We are going to talk about hard stuff. We're going to talk about things like loneliness. We're going to talk about things like suicide. We're going to talk about owning who you are when you're terrified. We're going to talk about challenging situations where people and families are polarized and splintered because of different political views, or people don't understand each other because of differences in pronouns. We're going to have these real conversations, and we're going to be authentic, and we're going to be real, and we're going to be messy, and we're going to be brave. And that's what really is the flavor of this next chapter in our lives. And I know that we're just about time to wrap up. We got a few minutes, but I would love both of you, Esteban and Connie, to add anything that you would like about this next chapter for us all.
Well, the next chapter is so exciting because right there, we're talking about being a badass and how it's so hard for you to accept that. But with She is Mother, we're going to also talk about stereotypes and how about we need to get rid of them and how we need to get rid of labels. Because not only are you a badass who can build a pergola, but you also look flawless with amazing makeup and eyelashes. Like you can do all the things and don't have to have a label.
Thank you. Thank you,
Right?
Connie.
I'm excited, and thank you for letting me be on your team.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you.
I have the same exact sentiment as well. And I'm really excited to see this new evolution of this idea that's been both this podcast, but also your career and your life's journey. I think it's very much like a homecoming in a way of just like, this is who you've always been. It's just leaning into it even more. And I think you're going to have a lot of success finding people that resonate with this message, just because you have a really broad audience and like a really broad vision for the way this can empower a lot of different types of people. So I'm excited. I feel like it's an honor to be a part of this team. I'm looking forward to the next phase of your career.
Thank you. Thank you, Esteban, and thank you, Connie. And I'm sure that the listeners can hear all the excitement in my voice. And, I'm thrilled. I'm really thrilled about what is next. And I think what's really important as we wrap up, this isn't goodbye, this is just a new chapter. And we're going from the empowered living zone, which, really has paved the way. All of these experiences this year have really paved the way for the new chapter. And, I invite the listeners to follow us, and we will be launching, and we will have lots of social media campaigns that will be introducing the new podcast, which again will be launching in January. As a matter of fact, Tuesday, January 7th of 2025, will hit our first episode will hit. And I'm really thrilled about that. And, I want listeners to know I'm still here, and you can still find me. You can find me on my website at www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. And also to let the listeners know that, there's lots of changes. And, as well as the new podcast, the website will be getting a new facelift, and it will have a new domain, and we will be announcing that as well. Also, the blog will continue under a new name. And I also have a really exciting announcement that, this experience on Empowered Living Zone and all of the support that I've received from Transformation Talk Radio staff, as well as Esteban and Connie and Eric and all of those that love me, there is now the birthing of a new book that I am working passionately on, and my hope is to have it published before the end of next year. So there's lots of new things coming. And so, I want to thank the listeners and supporters for joining me and supporting me. And I hope, and I invite you to the next chapter of my life. And hopefully it will be as inspiring and filled with hope as this show has been. Thank you very much. You are listening to the final episode of the Empowered Living Zone. Have a wonderful week. And remember, take good care of yourself. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Empowered Living Zone show with me, Dr. A, to create the life you crave. Tune in on the first and third Tuesdays at noon Pacific Time on TransformationTalkRadio.com and get ready for another show. Say yes to creating positive and empowering change in your life and move beyond life's challenging terrain into the zone of success. Be ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision in the Empowered Living Zone. For more information on how to do deep transformational work with me and to create the life you crave, visit empoweredlivingcoaching.com. That's empoweredlivingcoaching.com. See you next time.